We begin with a critical day on Capitol Hill as Congress steps up for our allies overseas. In the next hour, debate is set to begin in the House on a long-delayed foreign aid package. Votes are expected this afternoon on separate bills to support Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The package also includes humanitarian relief for Gaza. And to get these bills across the finish line, rookie Speaker Mike Johnson must rely on Democrats as he faces far-right backlash. In fact, he might also need the support of Democrats to keep his job. 3 GOP House members are now pushing a motion to vacate, which would force a vote on removing Johnson as Speaker. Joining us now, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from the great state of Washington. She is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Well, did you expect to be here this Saturday?
I did not.
Happy Saturday to you.
I had plans, but here I am.
Here you are. And then how do you think the vote is going to play out today? 2 parts. How, overall, do you think it's going to pass, and how will you vote on the separate bills?
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy that we're finally going to be able to vote on a Ukraine aid bill that is a standalone bill. It will pass, I believe, with every Democrat voting for it. It is really important aid. I think there will be some Republicans that vote for it, but how many, I don't know. I think on the Israel, all the bills are going to pass. On the Israel aid bill, I think you will see a good contingent of us that are voting no. I'm going to vote no on that bill because it does not include any conditions at all on aid to the Netanyahu government. It does not differentiate between offensive aid and defensive aid. I think many of us who will vote no on that bill have consistently supported Iron Dome funding and other defensive aid for Israel. But we cannot continue to watch the carnage that is happening in Gaza and have the United States military assistance be a part of that carnage. So to me and to many of us who are voting no, this is sort of an Iraq war moment. This is a moment where I think the public is not with us. Unlike the Iraq war, actually, during the Iraq war, that first vote where there were 132 plus Democrats voting against going into Iraq at that time. This is a situation where we don't even have the public with us. And we have not seen the kind of restrictions from the White House and from the administration. So whatever happens after this, this is the first time that Congress will be voting on offensive aid to Israel and to the Netanyahu government, who has been callous about the lives of children in Gaza, women in Gaza, innocent civilians, the death and destruction, the famine that is now happening and has taken hold in northern Gaza is not something that I believe we can be party to.
Congresswoman, a couple of points on the difference between the Ukraine and the Israel piece. How, for a lot of folks, they try to see this as a joint package. That, you know, in terms of supporting Ukraine, given what Russia's doing there, in terms of supporting Israel, in given what Hamas is doing there. How do members of the Progressive Caucus peel off that particular piece, specifically given everything that we know on the ground there? And I guess the second part of it would be, if Joe Biden came out and said, called for a ceasefire, which I think is one of the big issues for members of the caucus, what would you expect Netanyahu to do?
Well,
I mean, if he didn't do it, would you hold the president accountable for Netanyahu not doing that thing?
The president has already called for a ceasefire.
Right.
He recently did that. He also said that he would consider conditioning aid, and he tied it at that time to if the Netanyahu government was going to go into Rafah. And the fact is that there are strikes in Rafah, but there hasn't been a full-scale invasion yet. But I think that this is something where you have to remember, Michael, we are the largest backer of aid to Israel. the United States, other than Israel itself. We will be there for the defensive aid. That is the Iron Dome. That is if Iran or Hezbollah are going to launch strikes, just like you saw. You know,
right.
I appreciated and applauded the president working with the global community to make sure to repel that attack from Iran. But what we cannot do is allow Netanyahu to continue to drag us into the morass of what he has done in Gaza. And frankly, for the security and peace, safety of the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, the quickest way to get to anything that is going to assure peace and safety for both is to stop this war on Gaza and to bring home the hostages, to get humanitarian assistance in, and that creates the space to think about what a long-term permanent solution is. So I think that, you know, I think the president does have the responsibility at this point to change the calculus for Netanyahu. Because right now, there's no reason for Netanyahu to change his behavior. He's getting all this aid. He would not be able to wage this war on Gaza without the United States.
So, Representative Jayapal, let's talk about the Ukraine piece of this, specifically the stakes at this point in the timeline. Politico reporting this week, the intelligence shown to lawmakers last week and described by two members who have seen it, built on weeks of reports that have alarmed members of Congress. On Thursday, CIA Director William Burns warned that barring more U.S. aid, Ukraine, quote, could lose on the battlefield by the end of 2024. It is apparently that intelligence that finally motivated Speaker Johnson to action. Do you think there is the possibility this aid passes and we look back at this moment with 2020 vision and say, by the time they did this, it was already too late?
Well, I think that is a very serious question, Alicia. And the reality is Republicans have refused to believe intelligence reports. Republicans have refused to bring the aid package to the floor. As you remember, they brought an Israel aid package without the Ukraine aid package. And that is why Democrats at that time said, no, we need to have the Ukraine aid package. And so I think that this is a really important moment. It absolutely will pass. I will be enthusiastically supporting that Ukraine aid bill. And as I said to Michael, every Democrat, I think, will. I will say that this sort of goes to your question earlier, but also to yours, Alicia, that we had Timothy Snyder in, not to my committee, but Ro Khanna, I think it was Oversight. Ro Khanna asked him a really important question about this. And he said that it was a mistake to link the two because they are very different situations. And linking the two actually may have delayed and made it much harder to get that Ukraine aid across the finish line. Now, I think that, you know, maybe at that time it seemed like a good idea, but we've seen that we have full Democratic support. We just needed a handful of Republicans who weren't willing to come along to get that Ukraine aid to the floor. So let's get it out there. In the bill, there is a provision that allows it to go in an expedited fashion to Ukraine because we all understand that stopping Putin's march across Europe and, you know, the destruction that would cause with his dictatorship is very, very critical, not just to Ukraine, but to the entire world.
I want to play for folks what I almost called him Speaker Jeffries. Goodness.
Well, he should be.
Well, I just think the way the Democrats are acting, the way Democrats are carrying this legislation over the line, Democratic leader Jeffries, during his weekly address, had this to say about the negotiations about these aid packages, foreign aid packages. Take a listen, folks.
We still have to get the national security bills over the finish line. In that statement, that's what we made clear, that we have to do the business of the American people. We've been waiting for months, unnecessarily, because of gamesmanship and partisanship and brinksmanship on the other side of the aisle.
We've been waiting for months.
That's
Ukraine
right.
has been waiting for months. I was really struck by the Politico piece that Alicia noted about how the intelligence and the briefing from CIA Director Burns changed the mind of a number of members, and that's what changed Johnson's mind. When Speaker Johnson gave his remarks, and he didn't do a press conference, he didn't take any questions, but when he gave his remarks, he talked about the fact that his son is enrolling into the Naval Academy this fall,
That's right.
and this is a live fire situation. And we don't want to be in a position where we have to send our American sons and daughters on. Why is that what it took? Because it has been a dire situation in Ukraine for months.
That's right.
This is what has been the intelligence for months.
That's right.
What is so different now?
It's because Donald Trump doesn't want that aid to go through. Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't want that aid to go through. They tried to act like that intelligence wasn't real. And I think that I think we should call him Speaker Jeffries, because if you look at every single consequential thing that government has had to do, from the debt ceiling, going back to the McCarthy days, to now the appropriations bill, this aid package, it has been Democrats and our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who has made it possible for the government to move forward. And that, you know, I think that is a complicated dynamic in terms of the fact that this is a Republican speaker who does many things that you and I, all of us, don't agree with. I mean, this is an anti-abortion, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ, anti-democracy speaker who just went down and kissed the ring of Donald Trump and talked about election integrity, when we know that everything that Donald Trump is about is taking away election integrity. But he is doing the right thing on this issue, and I think that Leader Jeffries really, for all intents and purposes, is the speaker for any consequential bill, because it is Democrats that are going to provide the votes today to get Ukraine across the table.
Ooh, Michael. I thought Michael was like,
I'm not arguing with it, because that's what it looks like. At least that's what it is.
It is.
In the course of things. So how are Democrats assessing sort of the politics of this moment, where you conceivably, unlike with Kevin McCarthy, do find interest among some Democrats to, quote, save this speaker for purposes of getting, like we just talked about, these sort of big things done. But there's not going to be a lot of that on the agenda after this. So then it becomes sort of a careful what you wish for kind of bargain, doesn't it? When, you know, Speaker Johnson is still going to be a part of the Republican caucus, a Freedom Caucus member, et cetera. And so he'll be bringing stuff on that a lot of folks may be looking a little hanky at Democrats going, y'all kept this going.
Right.
If I'm in the Democrats' position, it is not a position I would want to take. I didn't, you know, put the noose around his neck, so why are you asking me to take it off, kind of deal. How are you guys assessing that inside the caucus to some extent?
Well, it hasn't, you know, we haven't engaged in that conversation in full, because it's a process question and it hasn't come up yet. But I think that I have said directly to Leader Jeffries, and I know he's thinking very carefully about this, and he will be the one to make the decision. But I have said we cannot just save the speaker without getting something really substantial for it. And in my mind, it should be that if essentially Hakeem Jeffries is going to function as our shadow speaker, then we move the big bills where there is bipartisan agreement, but we do not bring to the floor the things that Republicans are trying to use to win the election in November. We should not allow that to happen. If they need our votes for these consequential bills, then we need to have some sort of an agreement about what we're getting for that. I mean, this is an unprecedented situation. You know, under the Republicans, Michael, 7 rules have failed. I think it was 4 under McCarthy and 3 under Johnson. 7 rules have failed. And if you, again, look at even last night, many of us were in deep confusion because we never vote for Republican rules. There have been instances where the leadership decides that a few Democrats are needed to get a rule across the line under this chaos of the Republican majority. But this was a situation where I think it was very confusing, because we did want the aid package to move forward, and progressives in particular had fought to separate them so that we could vote our conscience and a very important moral vote on the aid to Netanyahu, but then the aid to Ukraine. And so progressives were successful working with our leadership, with Leader Jeffries. And, of course, it might be beneficial for the Republicans, too, because they don't want to vote for the Ukraine aid package, but they do want to vote for the Israel aid package. So I think, you know, we will follow Leader Jeffries. But we should be very thoughtful and very careful, because otherwise, if we save the speaker without anything to show for it, we may be contributing to our base saying, you're the ones who allowed him to continue to be speaker, and now he's bringing all these terrible things to the floor that are about winning the election in November.
Representative Jayapal, let's stay on that theme about winning elections. The Congressional Progressive Caucus this week released a list of progressive agenda items that includes a $17 per hour minimum wage by 2028, capping child care costs at 7% of income for all families, expanding Social Security benefits. This has been compared to FDR's New Deal. I've also heard members of your caucus say this is about a statement of priorities, right? That is the value of an agenda. What do you say to members of the progressive base who say a statement of priorities is not enough if we don't see action?
Yeah, Alicia, you see a big smile on my face because I love talking about our proposition agenda. So much of the time in politics we spend talking about what we're against. Here is a clear set of things that we are for. This was voted on by 103 members of the Progressive Caucus. A supermajority participated, and I think it was almost 95, 97% that approved this agenda. So this has a lot of buy-in from the inside and also from outside groups. The things that are on this are possible and populist and affect a number, big number of people. Those were sort of our criteria. So as much as we love certain things that we don't think are possible, some of those things aren't on there. We're talking about stopping the privatization of Medicare and expanding Medicare benefits to include dental, vision, and hearing. But my signature bill of Medicare for All is not on there because we know that under this president and this situation that we're in, we probably can't achieve it. The things that are on this agenda are achievable. And we can go to people and say, look at how much we did. We didn't get everything done, but this is the next thing on the page. And progressives teed it up with Build Back Better because that universal child care, that investment in housing, a huge issue, the comprehensive immigration reform, some of the advancing justice components of this, those were all things that were teed up by almost the entirety of the Democratic caucus, with the exception of a couple of senators, Democratic senators. That's part of the reason it didn't pass, because of the filibuster. And you'll see in the agenda that one of the things we tackle is making democracy work, which means not just changing the rulers, but also changing the rules. We got to get rid of that filibuster so that we can pass voting rights, so that we can pass codify abortion rights, those critical issues. So I believe this is possible, and it is what will motivate our base to actually fight for something, be a party of proposition, not just a party of opposition.
So now that's a debate you and I can have together.
Democrats will provide a majority of our majority as it relates to funding Israel, humanitarian assistance, Ukraine, and our allies in the Indo-Pacific. It remains to be seen what Republicans will do.
That was House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries after Democrats joined Republicans yesterday to advance an aid package of foreign bills and providing assistance to Israel, Ukraine, and other U.S. allies. In just a few hours, Congress is expected to vote on those bills. House Speaker Mike Johnson's support of the aid package may put his job in jeopardy now that at least 3 Republican members have announced their support for a motion to vacate the chair. He'll almost certainly need Democratic members, to bail him out. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. He's also a Biden-Harris campaign co-chair. Mr. Leader, welcome. It's good to see you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Good seeing you.
Absolutely.
Yes, it was welcome. Okay, so you actually voted against advancing the foreign aid bills yesterday. Why did you do that, and how are you going to vote on final passage of these bills?
Well, I voted against the rule,
yes, the rule.
Which is sort of traditional. When you've been the House Majority Whip, you get used to voting against rules. And there are a couple of things in there. I particularly don't like the fact that we are treating a significant portion of the monies to Ukraine as a loan, albeit forgivable. I just think that we need to just stand up for our allies. And Ukraine is an ally, may not be a member of NATO, but they've been trying to be a member of NATO for a long time. And the NATO members are supporting Ukraine, and we need to be supporting our NATO members. So there are a couple of things in that rule that irritate me a little bit, but I will be voting for the package.
Can I have one follow-up question,
sure.
Michael? It's just, you know, in the previous iterations of the bill, obviously this is not what the Senate sent. This is not what passed the Senate. The money that was allocated for Ukraine was the majority of that money was going to go to the Pentagon, so that the Pentagon could buy weapons and ammunition and parts made in America and then send that to Ukraine. What is different now in terms of it being a loan? Are they loaning money to the Pentagon? Can you break that down for folks?
Well, not all of it is a loan. I think somewhere around $10, $12 billion. And it's the part that deals with infrastructure issues and the rebuilding. Even that, to me, is a little bit of an insult. When you're talking about protecting our allies, our relationships, and our reputation around the world, we ought not be setting that up as a loan.
It's interesting, Congressman, to watch the evolution of Speaker Johnson and the reality of the various moments that have coalesced around Israel, certainly around Ukraine, hit him square in the eye. I want to play for you some sound from the Speaker on Capitol Hill yesterday on whether he's worried about his job. Let's take a listen.
Are you worried about your job?
No, don't worry. I just do my job.
Is it time to call MTG's bluff and just put the motion to vacate on the floor?
Look, we'll see what happens. I'm going to do my job. I'm not deterred by threats, and we're going to do the right thing and let the chips fall where they may.
I'm going to do the right thing. He's doing the right thing. Yeah. May pay a political price within his own caucus for it. How are Democrats assessing the politics of this moment? McCarthy's a very different was a very different consideration.
Yeah.
This one is I think of more value to Democrats because of the fact that you have a speaker who is not just, in a precarious situation, but actually is trying to do the right thing now.
Absolutely. And I think we'll have to wait and see. If this is an evolution rather than the revolution, then I'm inclined to be supportive. Though I'm going to follow the leadership of Hakeem Jeffries. He's in the room. I'm not in those rooms anymore. And I will talk with him, or continue to talk with him, to see exactly how we ought to conduct ourselves. But let me say this. After this vote is over today, I'm interested in seeing how the Speaker reacts to the votes. If you recall, what got Kevin McCarthy in trouble was the way he reacted to the votes.
His response after the vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to wait to see.
He effectively threw Democrats under the bus.
On the Sunday show, he did. He was like, Democrats are threatening democracy.
It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so I will hope that the Speaker has, in fact, evolved. And if he has, it'll be lasting.
And there won't be a need for revolution.
That's exactly right.
Congressman, I'm going to ask you to put on your Biden-Harris co-chair hat. There was an op-ed in the New York Times about Vice President Harris that I want to read to you. This is by Charles Blow. He writes, "The Kamala Harris moment has arrived. Being a trusted voice in favor of reproductive rights and against Republicans determined to restrict or eliminate them may be the greater contribution she can make to Biden's reelection bid and to maintaining national stability." Your sense at this moment of the role that Vice President Harris is poised to play on this campaign?
Well, I think Charles Blow is correct in this point. I don't think it just arrived. She's been there for quite some time. People seem to just be focused, just be listening. But Kamala Harris has been an incredibly effective vice president, an incredibly effective voice. And she got her footing way back in the beginning with the help of Simone. And so I'm very pleased with what she's doing. And so she didn't just get there. She's been there for a while, and I'm glad to see now that the country is focusing on it.
You know, I mean, I think it's not the part about me, but the important point is that this is two people on the ticket, and it's something that the Republicans love to talk about. We heard a lot about it in the Republican presidential primary, and it was Governor Haley who would talk about, former Ambassador Haley, who would talk about President Harris, and a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Vice President Harris. But they truly are a ticket, and it is true. A vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris, because they are running together. She is the Vice President of the United States of America. What are you hearing out there as you are traveling and talking to voters about this ticket, this campaign, and what voters want to see?
Things are coming together very, very well. The fact of the matter is people are beginning to focus now. I think that you, or the whole weekend team, has been talking about the lack of focus that there was in the beginning. Now people are seeing things. They are now listening. They are drawing contrasts between Biden and Trump. And I'm very pleased with the way those results are. I've seen these new numbers, and people are beginning to take a hard look at where we're going to go as to the future.
So, speaking of the future, you've got very important races coming up for House members this fall. I think smart analysis is showing that the Democrats are very well primed to take back the leadership of the House. Senate is a little bit more of a play there. And may be difficult, but you do have the momentum. You do have the opportunity. How do you see the various issues out there coalescing around what a second term for Joe Biden will look like, particularly given some of the dissension that still exists among many Americans, particularly some in the Democratic Party, the progressive left, around Gaza, for example, or, student loan debt. How do you paint the broader picture? Because that's what Republicans are doing. They're painting the broader picture. They're not dealing with the specifics. They're talking more broadly about how bad things are. My God, the country's falling apart. How dare you employ 300,000 people last month, right?
How dare you bring murders down by 20%?
Well, thank you, Simone, because you went exactly where I want to go. You've got reporting out by Axios right now showing the number of homicides have plummeted in major U.S. cities, nearly 20%. And yet you would not know that in listening to your opponents. How do you level up that conversation and say, okay, let's check this here, because we're not going to get stuck on stupid, right? We're not going to sit here and pretend that, crime is run away in the cities, et cetera.
Well, I think you have to look globally. To begin with, let's look at where the president has been. The president has been, for instance, on this whole issue in the Middle East. He's been for a two-state solution for a long, long time. And he has made it very clear to Netanyahu that we are not going to be offensive as we go into the future in the Middle East. We are going to protect Israel's right to defend itself. But when we come to these responses, he's letting Netanyahu know exactly where the country stands. So on that issue, yes, I'd much rather have, after November, a person in office who wants a two-state solution rather than that person who spent the last 2 or 3 years undermining the two-state solution. If you look on the domestic front, who would you rather have in place? The guy who protects this democracy, who defends our fighting men and women with dignity and respect, or the guy who says he wants to be an autocrat and be a dictator on day one. Or the guy who believes in the democracy, who believes in laying a foundation for the future, and who believes in protecting our men and women. So look on the domestic front, look on the global front, and just look at where we are today. Where would you like to see this country 5 years from now? Under the control of a person who believes in our pursuit of a more perfect union, or the person who ignores the Constitution and would like to suspend it for the future of our children and grandchildren? I think we're in good shape.
I've said many times, I don't walk around this building being worried about a motion to vacate. I have to do my job. We did. I've done here what I believe to be the right thing, and that is to allow the House to work its will. And as I've said, you do the right thing and you let the chips fall where they may.
So in today's Republican Party, doing the right thing could cost you your job. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is blasting Speaker Mike Johnson as a, quote, lame duck after the House approved much-needed aid for Ukraine. And when it comes to her push to remove him as Speaker, well, she's now saying, well, she'll let her fellow Republicans hear from their constituents before moving forward with a motion to vacate. Back with us is Congressman Jasmine Crockett.
Congressman, let me just pull up the cover of the New York Post. It features this image of Marjorie Taylor Greene with the headline, Niet Moscow Marjorie. GOP rebels defeated as House passes $61 billion in Ukraine aid. I don't even have a question, just looking for your reaction.
You know what? I very rarely agree with the New York Post. But I do today. Yeah, seriously. I mean, you know, we were in oversight this week. It was a powerful and amazing hearing that the Democrats, again, owned. And it was interesting that she consistently, historically, has tweeted out Russian propaganda. I mean, literally quote tweeting out like Russian propaganda. And the fact that she thinks that she's on the right side of history is beyond me. I mean, when I first got to the House, I thought, is she really this slow or is it a game? And I've decided she's really this slow.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that. The reality, I think, for me, is in a number of areas. One, in the visual of the speaker coming out to the banker microphones. In a moment like this, there were no other Republicans around.
No leadership, no House leadership.
No House leadership, no members, no rank and file members. The starkness of that moment struck me because it was almost as if he was like, I'm going to walk this walk by myself, and I want to be very clear about why I'm doing this. And so that was one. The second was the Marjorie Taylor Greene, show your behind moments that she had throughout the day. The thumbs down and the loud noise. How when you're sitting there and you're actually trying to get the business of the country done, how do you get around all of that noise so that you can get to a moment with the leadership to actually get the paperwork done, despite all the other drama that's happening around you? For example, when the Ukrainian flags came out, you have, members, Republican members, thumbs down, telling them to put the damn flags down. Mm-hmm. But they weren't upset about the, decorum of Marjorie Taylor Greene with the MAGA outfit at the State of the Union. So how does the House reconcile itself? Do you just muddle through until November, or do you just try to find one or two more things to get done?
Democrats have consistently said, we are here to work. We're here to work for the American people. And every single piece of foundational legislation that has been passed, it's been passed because Democrats have carried it. We have carried the load. And I know that the American people see this, and I know that the American people are thinking, how in the heck did we allow the Republicans to be the ones that were in control of the House? There's been nothing but drama as it relates to the speakerships and even the threat of kicking out another speaker and throwing the House into turmoil, especially as we see the hostilities growing across the world. It is not a time to play games. And to be frank, it's never a time to play games as a U.S. sitting member of our Congress. But that's exactly what we're getting from the MAGA branch. And I, again, have to applaud the speaker because he has decided it's time to be an adult. And that's one thing that McCarthy really struggled with, was actually deciding that I'm not only going to be an adult in what I do, but also in what I say. And Speaker Johnson has decided that he's going to do that. Now, if that costs him his job, I think that the American people are smart enough to know that it's not the Democrats' fault, but it's MAGA's fault. And ultimately, I think that he knows how to work his way to maybe holding on to his job.
I think the speaker's going to be fine, honestly.
You do?
I do.
Well, you know, I mean, Politico had a piece, I think, that kind of speaks to that. It notes that Democrats have signaled that they will help save him, as in Speaker Johnson, if there's a formal referendum on his speakership. That is exactly the type of bipartisan rescue mission that many Republicans predicted would have ultimately doomed McCarthy if 8 Republicans hadn't successfully voted him out on the first try. Uncharted Speaker territory. You know, I think that this is, yes, Mike Johnson did do the right thing on this. I am waiting to see if this is just a moment or if this is true movement, because he did go down to Mar-a-Lago not a week and a half ago and stood with Donald Trump, who is an unelected individual. He's a former president who literally seems to be holding the House Republican caucus by the arm.
Unelected, multi-indicted individual.
Exactly. So I'm wondering if this is just a moment or if this is true movement for Mike Johnson and evolution. And then secondly, I also think this is a triumph for the American people, but it really shows the depth, I think, of the President Biden, and Democratic leadership in the House. They have outmaneuvered consistently Mike Johnson and Republicans every single time in this 118th Congress, I think, Congresswoman.
I think it's a moment. I'm not going to get so excited. And those Democrats that have gotten out and said what they're going to do and that kind of stuff, listen, we follow our leadership. So they may have said that they're going to vote for him. Now, when I say I'm not voting for him, I stand by that. I only vote for Leader Jeffries if we have to go through this again. But he has to get to the table with Leader Jeffries for Leader Jeffries to then allow different Democrats to actually go out and do something. We don't do things for you or save you because you did the bare minimum of doing your job. We've got to get something out of this. Listen, we know that the Republican policies that have been pushed thus far are failures. And so the only thing that we can do is when he is in a time of need, that is our time to negotiate. That is our time to make sure that we can push through and get something as well. You know, doing the decent thing as allies and friends of various nations and countries, that's just doing the bare minimum. That's what we did. We did the bare minimum, just like getting through our budget. That is the bare minimum. It took us an extra 6 months. Yeah. So we don't reward doing the bare minimum.
The bare minimum, very important for the people of Ukraine. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, thank you for doing more than the bare minimum and coming to be with us this morning. A new bill has been introduced in Congress that, if passed, would strip Secret Service protection for convicted felons sentenced to prison. Congressman Benny Thompson proposed that legislation on Friday. It would address the very specific scenario of a Secret Service protectee having to serve time in jail. The proposal is a not-so-subtle dig at Donald Trump and a reminder that none of this is normal. Joining us now is the former chairman of the January 6th committee, Democratic Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi.
Good morning, Chairman. It is a pleasure to have you. The Washington Post headline screams, if Trump is convicted, Secret Service protection may be obstacle to imprisonment. I thank you for your legislation. I have been saying for some time that any former president or federal official who has this type of protection and some of the other benefits of being a former member of office, all of that should go away. All of it, all the privileges, all the briefings, all the access should go away until your status is cleared up in the criminal justice system. What say you, sir? This legislation for me is long overdue in this world of Trump.
Well, thank you so much. I think it basically says that in America, no one is above the law. So, you know, it's really simple. The average man or woman on the street assumes that when you break the law, if there are some benefits that you are receiving before you are convicted, you lose those benefits. As you know, all former presidents receive Secret Service protection. So that's a given. But I think in this moment that we're looking at now, just like we have in the past, we have amended the law relative to protectees. So when former Senator Robert Kennedy was killed, we amended the law to say that nominees of a party for president would receive the protection. So this is an amendment to current law that says, just like in any other state, most of the times when a person is convicted, if there are some benefits associated with that person, for instance, Social Security. If you go to prison and receiving Social Security, that benefit's cut off right then until you get out. So there are some normal things that occur, and we're just expanding that to this current situation. None of us ever dreamed that we'd be here, but we are. Someone with 91 felony counts over their head, someone who's intimidating prospective jurors, someone who's having to be told by the judge a number of times, sit down. I think it's a moment in this country that we have to address. And for this notion that somehow what happened on January 6th didn't happen, or it didn't happen and what you saw with your own eyes didn't occur, there's something wrong with that. So this clears it up. It makes sure that those individuals at the highest seat of power understand that there are penalties that apply to you, even when you are president of the United States.
Chairman, as I was reading the Disgraced Former Protectees Act, I was a little confused about something, which is this answering specifically for that person's time in prison, or is it also applicable if they were to then leave prison? Is it applicable to the time after?
Well, two things. First of all, if you're in prison, you're under the custody of that system. So there's no sense duplicating the protection.
Yep.
Now, when you come out, the spouse continues to receive the protection. At the end of that individual has to apply. A lot depends on what the sentence is for that person, and ultimately it's up to the Secret Service whether they get it back.
You know, Congressman, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is a really important conversation and a critical piece of legislation, because in legal circles and non-legal circles alike, and throughout cable news and in the papers, many folks have said, and I mean, it's even in there in that Washington Post headline that Michael referenced, that, oh, well, Secret Service could be a barrier to Donald Trump or anyone like him meeting consequences. But as you well know, I mean, you are the ranking member of Homeland Security in the House, the committee. There are very cushy prisons in this country. The prison that Michael Cohen went to is on the list of Forbes' 10 best country club prisons in the country. This idea that Secret Service is a barrier to accountability, I think is not true. But I wonder what you think.
Well, we wanted to clear up the law. You know, the Secret Service is there for protection, but that protection stops when it determines whether or not an individual has broken the law. Every individual has an opportunity for his or her day in court if they are charged. If they are convicted, in this instance, the moment that person is convicted and given to the custody of the authorities, they lose that protection at that moment. So there's no question, and you've seen all the hearings in court where when they remand that individual to the custody of whomever, that president loses that protection at that moment. So it's clear in this situation that the public has to understand no one is above the law. That individual who is entrusted with that authority also understand that he or she is not above the law. And to be quite honest, as you know, I chaired the January 6th committee. There were a lot of things that came up in our review that causes me great pause. And so I think anyone in the highest seat of power would give second thoughts to some of the things they do if they would understand that some of the trappings that go with this job could be lost if you do the wrong thing. But look, 91 criminal charges it is clear that something is wrong, something is amiss, and we have to at least address it. This is my way of addressing what most people assume already occurs, that if you break the law, there are certain benefits that should no longer apply. And in this instance, that Secret Service 24/7 protection would be no longer in force.
Chairman, given the current composition of the leadership of the House, what are the prospects of your legislation actually passing in this Congress? Or is this something that you see, getting waylaid by Republicans because, again, they're in the Donald Trump protection racket? Or is it something you think that you could peel off a number of Republicans just enough to get it passed because they, like you, see the value of the argument you're making?
Well, I think it's clear that this is a marker for the future. We've never discussed the presidential protectee situation. I'm convinced, though, that if the current situation rests with the fact that former President Trump is convicted, I think it takes a different venue. I think the Speaker would be hard-pressed not to bring it to the floor. I think the Senate would do likewise. But clearly, in this great country of ours, when a person who's gone before his peers and is convicted, then it's over. You have lost many of those privileges that you were entitled to before the conviction. I'm optimistic. I know there's a lot of pressure, but this is a marker for future discussion and debate that depends largely on what occurs in New York over the next few weeks.
All righty. Congressman Benny Thompson, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.